Hi, I'm Rochelle Gentile, president of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra League. I'm here at the Dubuque Golf and Country Club, kicking off our virtual Soundbites series. Under normal circumstances, you'd be right here with me, enjoying a great lunch and a preview of the DSO's upcoming concert, and I'm sure you will be again soon. As you may know, the DSOL develops and administers projects, programs, and events that provide music education opportunities to folks of all ages, as well as financial support to the DSO and its youth ensemble programs. Each year, the League contributes support to youth education events and programs such as the 3rd and 5th grade Arts Trek concerts, the 4th grade Adopt a Musician program, the Youth Concerto competition, the Dubuque Symphony Youth Ensembles, and the Summer String Camp. Along with our many other endeavors is our Senior Classics program, now in its 9th year, providing performances by DSO musicians to entertain residents and their families at local nursing homes and assisted living centers. While the past year has looked a little different, we continue to focus our efforts on fundraising. We encourage and welcome you to join us in our 54th year of supporting the DSO. Please check out the DSO's website for more information about how you can get involved. We hope to see you soon, but before I go, I'd like to introduce our esteemed music director and conductor, Dr. William Intriligator.
Thank you, Rochelle, and welcome everyone. I'm excited to talk to you about Copland's Appalachian Spring now. This is one of my absolute favorite pieces of music, and it's kind of funny how it's followed me throughout my musical career since the time I was young. When I was still an oboist, going to summer music camp at Interlochen National Music Camp in the late 1980s, I played Appalachian Spring in the orchestra there and fell in love with it. And it kind of helped me discover a new love for orchestra playing and orchestra music. Then when I was in college, I chose Appalachian Spring in its original 13-instrument version to perform as one of the very first pieces I conducted as a young budding conductor. Over the years, I've conducted it many times, including one of my most memorable times was actually early on in my tenure as the music director here in Dubuque, when we performed the entire ballet score, not just the suite. In the 13-instrument original version, accompanying the original film of Martha Graham's choreography. That was a really cool event, also because Marina O'Rourke, the director of the Heartland Ballet, gave a wonderful lecture about Martha Graham and the choreography and the ballet and the importance of Appalachian Spring in the ballet world. And then I've conducted numerous times the orchestral version or the 13-instrument version. And when during the pandemic we've decided to limit the number of musicians on stage at these concerts to have social distancing on the stage, we knew that we could only have maybe a max of 15 or 20 players. I thought, Appalachian Spring in its original 13-instrument version would work pretty well. And then it was a funny coincidence that it ended up being on a concert that is like literally the date of the first day of spring. Let me talk to you a little bit about the title of Appalachian Spring because it really isn't referring to the spring season at all. The title of this music, when it was written by Aaron Copland, he knew he was writing it to be a ballet for Martha Graham. And he entitled it Ballet for Martha. He didn't have any other title in mind, which is hard to imagine because the music sounds so perfect like that title, Appalachian Spring. Well, it was Martha Graham, after hearing the music and doing the choreography and sort of getting the whole story of the ballet in place. The story involves a young farmer couple just recently married in the early years of the 1800s in America in the Appalachians. Martha Graham discovered a line from a poem by the poet Hart Crane, and it was Appalachian Spring, referring to an Appalachian source of water, a spring source of water. But somehow, ever since she decided to title the ballet Appalachian Spring, Copland liked that title. He thought, gee, what a nice title. And he went with it. And Copland would often tell stories about how throughout later in his life, when people would come up to him and say, when I hear your music, Appalachian Spring, it feels like springtime and it feels like the Appalachians in the early 1800s. He would just sort of smile and say thank you. But inside he would be chuckling because he didn't have that in mind when he wrote the music. The title came afterward. And not only that, in the original poem, the word spring doesn't refer to the season, it refers to a source of water. Be that as it may, it is a great piece of music. And it is an important piece of music in Copland's long career as a composer. Let's not forget Copland lived a very long life from 1900 to 1990. In his earlier years as a composer in the 19-teens and early 20s, he was experimenting with ways of incorporating jazz into classical music. Finding that Gershwin and others had done it more successfully, he started to embrace more modernist approaches. He went to Paris and studied with the great Nadia Boulanger, who was a great composition teacher for so many. And then his music was a little bit more modern and avant-garde at that time. It wasn't until the Great Depression in the 1930s that Copland felt that his music should serve a purpose to bring people up, to lift them when their spirits are down. And how perfect and appropriate for right now that we're still recovering from this pandemic, and that now more than ever we need the great music of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra to lift our spirits, to provide comfort, and to help bring us together again. Anyway, it was that idea in the Great Depression that Copland thought that he should write music that was, in a sense, utilitarian, not just for an elite group of kind of musical composers and, kind of like the musical intelligentsia, if you will, avant-garde techniques and things that would be appreciated. He thought, no, I need to write music that will help people feel better during this difficult time. And that's when he wrote these great ballet scores, Appalachian Spring in 1944, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. And by the way, isn't it interesting that if you haven't heard my lecture yet on George Walker and his Lyric for Strings, which is on this program, it's another Soundbites lecture that I've done, that George Walker won the Pulitzer Prize many years later, but for a piece that he wrote George Walker's Lyric for Strings was written almost at the same time as Copland's Appalachian Spring. Interesting. Anyway, Appalachian Spring won the Music Critics Circle Award and the Pulitzer Prize in 1945. The action of the ballet, it says in the score, concerns a pioneer celebration in spring. There you go, spring. So this is the story that Martha Graham put to the music after she heard it, after Copland wrote it without a story in mind. Martha Graham wrote this: a pioneer celebration in spring around a newly built farmhouse in the Pennsylvania hills in the early part of the 1800s. The bride-to-be and the young farmer husband enact the emotions, joyful and apprehensive, their new domestic partnership invites. An older neighbor suggests now and then the rocky confidence of experience. A revivalist and his followers remind the new householders of the strange and terrible aspects of human fate. At the end, the couple are left quiet and strong in their new house. It's such a beautiful score. Some of the most beautiful things that Copland wrote are in here, and something that is a characteristic sound of Copland and the music that he wrote that had what we now consider an American sound. A similar sound as you can hear in his Fanfare for the Common Man. Stacked fourths, fifths, and other wider intervals than you would normally have in music that create a kind of openness. In some of the ballet scores reflecting the West, like Rodeo and Billy the Kid, those kinds of techniques reflect a kind of expansiveness of the landscape. Those open intervals, instead of the normal chords of thirds and things like that, having fourths stacked like that, literally a more expansive, wider musical interval between notes somehow manifests itself into a feeling of expansiveness that just feels like the West. Here's a little bit of the beginning of Appalachian Spring, which begins very slowly, very beautifully and calmly. It sort of begins and ends with this music, like it's a sunrise, and then a lot of things happen during the day, and then a sunset at the end. The music feels very tender and heartfelt, but one of the things that I find fascinating is that Copland himself, numerous times in the score, would write the words semplice. He didn't want it to be too fussy or fancy or artistic in a sense. He wanted it to be simple, to really penetrate to the core. This is the scene in the ballet where we're just sort of getting to know the different characters. The young farmer, his bride-to-be, the older lady who's the neighbor who's offering some advice, the revivalist who's very passionate and, and then his followers who are very cult-like. It's just setting the stage. Of course, the music will get much faster and livelier. Here's a part. Getting back to that idea that he wrote simple in the music a lot. One of my favorite stories from my time working with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, when I got to work with them for about 5 years in the 90s, they worked with Copland himself on this piece. And they kept telling me that when Copland was rehearsing it, he kept saying, just play it frankly. Just play it frankly. Don't make it overly fussy or beautiful. Interesting. With just 13 instruments, it's amazing the different colors and sounds and dynamic ranges he has. This chord progression, which evolved out of music, that quiet music at the beginning, is actually music that Copland himself would sometimes play at the piano. And it was music that he identified with as being like his personal musical signature. And again, you can hear it in many of other pieces of his. But a great story that my teacher, Murray Sidlin, once told me was that he was rehearsing Copland's The Tenderland opera, and Copland was in the room and tried to get everybody's attention who was talking by just sitting at the piano playing this part, and it was like he was saying musically, I'm here, let's begin. So it's like a musical signature. I have to confess that I love playing it at the piano too. Sometimes in just my daily kind of playing piano things, I will play these chords of Appalachian Spring, and they're so pungent and beautiful. He chose just the right dissonances, like a major chord with a major seventh in it, that it just gets you. It's so beautiful. There are many exciting dance-like parts of this later on, parts that are rhythmically really intense and wonderful. So this Appalachian Spring suite, it's a suite because it's not the full ballet, and it really only leaves out maybe about 10 minutes of dance music that was purely choreographic, as Copland liked to say. It was like not quite as interesting. So it's just a shortened version of Appalachian Spring. I'm so excited to perform it for you on these concerts. As I've said, Copland's music is near and dear to me, and this, above all of Copland's music, is one of my absolute favorite pieces. Some of you might recall that I actually gave a 2-part lecture at the Dubuque Museum of Art a few years ago, where I compared the stylistic influence and importance of Grant Wood and Aaron Copland. And it was a really cool exploration. I do think of them both as being these kind of icons of America at that time, in the art world and in the music world. We hope that you enjoy Appalachian Spring on our Classics 2 concerts. Thank you.